In a small, quiet village, nestled among rolling hills and dense forest, there lived a man named Paul. Paul was a sturdy man with a temperament as fierce as his deep-set eyes. He had grown up in hardship, with a father who never skimped on anything and a mother who rarely spoke. The bitter experiences of his childhood left a lasting impression on his soul, turning him into a man who saw the world as a harsh, unforgiving place. Paul married Glory, a gentlewoman whose name perfectly described her spirit. She was the light of their humble household, always smiling, always kind, always hoping for better days. Her beauty was evident not only in her appearance but also in the warmth she radiated even when life was difficult. But despite her kind heart, she lived in constant fear of her husband's wrath. Paul's anger was unpredictable. Sometimes small things would anger him, a food he didn't like, a minor misunderstanding, or even a simple question. When his anger flared, he would attack Glory with razor-sharp words and often with his fist. The bruises on her skin were evidence of years of silent suffering. Glory remained for different reasons. She stayed because, deep down, she believed Paul was a good person who could change. She stayed because she was scared of what people would say if she quit. And most importantly, she stayed for her son, James. James was a little boy, but already the weight of the world seemed to be on his tiny shoulders. He had grown up with his father's violence, heard his mother's muffled screams and felt powerless to protect her. James loved his mother dearly, but the pain of watching her suffer ate away at his heart like an unrelenting animal. He tried to talk to Paul, begging him to stop, but his words were always met with more anger and violence. As James grew up, his anger grew. It was bubbling under the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. He had inherited his father's strength, but unlike Paul, he had learned to control it, until one fateful night. It was a cold winter's night, and the wind was howling outside their little house. Glory had been busy all day, cooking dinner to keep the house warm. Paul returned from the village, but his mood was dark and gloomy. As they sat down to dinner, the tension in the air was palpable. James watched his father closely and sensed something was wrong. It didn't take long to see why Paul was upset. The stew was too salty, the bread too hard, the fire too low. His venomous voice cut through the air as he hurled insults at Glory. Her trembling voice tried to soothe him, but it only fueled his rage. "She's a worthless woman," Paul cried, slamming his fist on the table. The dishes clattered, and the fire flickered ominously. "Can't you do anything right?" James felt his heart pounding. He had seen this scene play out too many times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, he could no longer remain silent. "Leave her alone, Dad." James's voice was resolute, a mixture of fear and defiance. Paul narrowed his eyes at his son. "What did you say to me, boy?" he growled, rising from the table. He clenched his fist, towering over James like a dark, menacing figure. James stood up as well, his hands trembling, but his determination strong. "I said, leave her alone." Paul gave a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down Glory's spine. "You think you can talk to me like that? I'm your father, boy. You're just like your mother, weak and pathetic." The words cut deep, but James didn't back down. He had been afraid for years, had spent years watching his mother suffer, but tonight, enough was enough. "You're the weak one, Dad," James said firmly, his voice trembling with emotion. "You're too much of a coward to face your own pain, so you take out your anger on the people who love you." The truth in James's words hit Paul like a blow. His face contorted with rage, and before anyone could react, he lunged at his son, his fist raised, but James was ready. He had seen it coming, and as Paul's fist came toward him, he moved quickly, grabbing his father's arm and pushing him back. Paul stumbled, shocked by his son's sudden strength. But his shock quickly turned to fury, and he charged at James again. The two of them struggled, their anger and pain fueling a battle that had been brewing for years. Glory watched in horror, her heart breaking as she saw the two people she loved most fighting like enemies. She tried to intervene, but the force of their struggle was too great. A storm of emotions raged inside James, years of fear, anger, and helplessness all coming to the surface. As they struggled, Paul lost his balance and fell, hitting his head on the edge of the table with a sickening thud. The room fell silent. James froze, his breath caught in his throat as he stared at his father lying motionless on the floor. Glory rushed to Paul's side, her hands trembling as she felt for a pulse. But there was nothing. Paul was gone. For a moment, time seemed to stop. James couldn't move, couldn't speak. Waves of fear and guilt washed over him as the reality of what had happened slowly became clear to him. He had only meant to protect his mother, to keep her safe, but now he had done the unthinkable. Glory looked up at her son, her eyes filled with sorrow and disbelief. But there was no anger in her gaze, only a deep sadness. She knew that this wasn't James's fault. He was just a boy who had been pushed to the brink, a boy who had finally stood up to the monster that had haunted their lives for so long. James. Glory's voice was soft, almost a whisper. It wasn't your fault. You just wanted to protect me. Tears welled up in James's eyes as he knelt beside his mother. I didn't mean to, Mom. I didn't want this to happen. I know, sweetheart, Glory said, pulling him into a tight embrace. I know. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside, there was only silence. The next few days were a blur. The villagers whispered about what had happened, but no one dared to speak openly. The police came, questions were asked, and in the end, it was ruled an accident. Paul's death was the tragic end of a man who had lived a life of violence, and James was left to carry the burden of that night for the rest of his life. Glory did her best to support her son, to help him heal, but the wounds ran deep. James had been forced to grow up too fast, and the weight of what he had done was a heavy one. But as the years passed, he slowly began to forgive himself, with his mother's unwavering love as his anchor. The cycle of pain that had plagued their family was finally broken, but at a great cost. Paul's death was a tragedy, but it was also the end of an era of suffering. In time, James learned to find peace, and Glory, though forever marked by her past, found a new strength within herself. Their lives would never be the same, but they would go on, carrying the lessons of the past with them.